Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose Live. My name is Leah, and I'm a bookseller in the Children and Teens Department, and I have the pleasure of hosting you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us in this new format where we continue to bring amazing authors and engaging books to politics and prose community. And now to the comfort of your screens. In a few moments, we'll start our discussion with our special guest, Deborah Wiles. But if you'd like to ask a question to our guests, you can click the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen, and you can add one there. And at the end of the chat, we're going to have some time with Deborah to answer some of your questions. You can also click the shining purchase button that you can get your own copy of Deborah's new book, Kent State, as well as other of her amazing titles from our website. And we're currently offering reduced shipping. And lastly, just a reminder that unlike in our in-person events, our guests and audience members, they can't see you through the screen. So welcome to come as you are and get comfortable and enjoy the discussion. And now, the event you're waiting for. It is my pleasure to introduce our special guest, the brilliantly talented Deborah Wiles. She is the author of several award-winning children's and young adult books, including her innovative 60s documentary novels, which include Countdown, the National Book Award finalist Revolution, and Anthem. Deborah is the recipient of many accolades, including the Ezra Keats Award, the NAACP Award finalist, the E.B. White Award, and the list goes on. Deborah has also taught writing, and she promotes the importance of storytelling. And today, we're celebrating the publication of her newest amazing and deeply moving book, Kent State. Told in a testimony of interweaving poetic perspectives, Kent State paints a vivid portrait of the events of May 4th, 1970, as well as it acts as a call to action for readers to be informed citizens and remember. It is my honor to introduce Deborah Wiles. Take it away.
Thank you. Wow, that was something else. I'm in my living room and I can't see you, but I hope you're in a comfortable place. Thank you for coming, and thank you to Politics and Prose and Kids in Prose, especially for having me. My hometown bookstore for many, many years when I lived in the DC area. I went to many author events there, and as I became an author, I went to many author events of my own there. So many thanks to you all. This is an odd and different kind of way of launching a book when I can't see you sitting out there in chairs and gauge whether you get all my jokes or or if you've fallen asleep. So it's okay, I think, if you do and I can't see you. But in the meantime, I'm going to tell you about Kent State. I brought some pictures and I want to show you those as well. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit about Kent State. Here is the book, Kent State. And you'll see the whole jacket when I show pictures. There are 67 shots on the entire jacket, as 67 shots were fired in 13 seconds on May 4th, 1970, when the Ohio National Guard opened fire on unarmed teenagers, mostly 19, 20, 21-year-olds, who were protesting Nixon's invasion of Cambodia during the Vietnam War. On April 30th, 1970, Richard Nixon announced on television that the US was now operating an incursion into Vietnam, not an invasion, which of course everyone saw through, in order to hasten the end of the Vietnam War. But the way that people saw this was, most people in the US, especially young people, saw this as a widening of the Vietnam War. A war that had been promised when Nixon was elected in 68, had been promising to end. And here it was 1970 and the war was escalating. Troop withdrawals had been happening. But now we were going to have more troops being sent. Nixon's justification was that Vietnamese were hiding over the border in Cambodia and they were stockpiling their supplies and their ammunition. And we should get rid of them by bombing them. Now, college students showed up in huge numbers throughout the country protesting this invasion, and partly because they were anti-war, but also because they knew they were going. There had been all kinds of deferments, draft deferments for such a long time during the war. But in 1969, in an effort to create more troops for this war, the US draft began, the Vietnam War draft in December of 69, and deferments were largely done away with at that time, or they were decided by your local draft board, and they always had to hit a number. So if they could hit that number, maybe you wouldn't be called up, but they could get rid of your deferment if they needed to hit their quota. And so students knew that their deferments didn't mean anything anymore, and they came out in force to protest against the Vietnam War. In Ohio, the governor was running for re-election on a law and order platform, Governor Rhodes. And in Kent State, when the students began their, what they called, the townies called rioting, the mayor called the National Guard, called the governor, who called the National Guard and sent them in as a show of force. So when he sent them in as a show of force, then suddenly the landscape changed totally. And they occupied the campus at Kent State without permission, because they had permission from Governor Barnes, who was actually, he was running for state senator, or US senator, sorry. But he at the time was the governor. So he sent in the guard. The guard came and occupied the campus after May 1st. And from May 1st to May 4th, there were all kinds of fighting going on between students and the National Guard. They burned down the ROTC building. No one really knows what happened when they burned down the ROTC building on Friday night. On Saturday night, they tried to get the mayor to come talk to them, and the mayor refused and never showed up. The helicopters came with tear gas, and they were tear gassing students. The guard was marching with bayonets, pushing students back into their dorms and locking them in for the night. And on Monday, May 4th, students had had enough. And 2,000 of them eventually gathered on the commons at Kent State, the big open area like many campuses have, university campuses, and began a protest. And that protest was met with the National Guard coming after students and being told to push them back up over Blanket Hill and into the parking lot and disperse them to the Prentice Hall parking lot, which turned ugly. And at some point that no one can decipher and no one can agree upon, 67 shots were fired by companies G and C in 13 seconds. 4 students were killed, 9 more were wounded. The guard has never apologized. The war began to turn, and the 60s were over. The 60s were over on May 4th, 1970. So the story is about that in part. That's where I begin. When I was 16 years old, I lived in Charleston, South Carolina. We were an Air Force family. My dad was a colonel, and he flew C-141s, Starlifters, from Charleston, South Carolina, with supplies for the war over to Vietnam. And he flew back C-141 Starlifters that were full of bodies. I knew that we weren't to talk about the war at our dinner table. We weren't allowed to. It was never said we weren't allowed to, but we knew. We just knew that this was hard. It was hard for my dad. It was hard for the country. I never really even knew how my dad felt about the Vietnam War. I just knew that this was serious and I wasn't to talk about it. It was on television every single night. I didn't see my dad much for those 2 years that he flew from Charleston. We moved to the Philippines right after Kent State that summer, and my dad was in charge of the tarmac there, and so he actually greeted those planes going in and out, and I got to know a little bit more about the war when I was over there. But on May 4th, 1970, I was 3 days before my 17th birthday, and this was all we could talk about in school, kids. I had friends that we would gather in little corners and we'd say, did you hear this? Did you hear this news? And nobody really knew what was going on because all we had no social media at the time, not technology like we have. We had 3 channels on the television. We had newspapers. And all we knew was what we got from those sources. And what we got from those sources was enough, but it was enough we understood that we were stupefied. We were shocked. The country was shocked. We had no idea what had just happened, that the US government had come onto a college campus and shot and killed its citizens. How does that happen? That has stayed with me and stayed with me. So when I wrote the 60s trilogy, Countdown, Revolution, and Anthem, I kept coming up against Kent State in my research. And I kept thinking, I'll never be able to write about that. It's just too awful. It's just too awful. It was so shocking and it was so terrible. And yet something kept picking at me. Something kept picking at me, and it would open up again, and it would open up again in another piece of research. And so I began saving it. I began a file for Kent State. I began a Pinterest board for Kent State. I put all my work on Pinterest, all the research that I'm doing. I just make boards. It's very messy, but that's how I keep track of where those things are I find online. So I had all these boards for Kent State. And by the time I finished Anthem, I said to David Levithan, who is my editor for these books at Scholastic, I said, there's no way I can't write about Kent State. I have to write about this time in our history. It's got to be done. There's nothing out there for young people. And how can I even tell this story? David was all over, okay, let's do it. And then we had several conversations about it. It felt like a natural next step after 1969. And by the time I had finished Anthem, and I'll show you this in the photos, by the time I finished Anthem, I knew that I was going to be writing about Kent State. So I had in the scrapbook at the end of Anthem, these books are full of little scrapbooks of primary source documents, these 60s trilogies. I knew that I would include Kent State. So I included a still, and I included some information about Kent State. And I said to David, okay, so how do we do this? You know, how can we do this? And over several conversations trying to figure out how, we came up with a book we had just both read independently called Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, which I had absolutely loved. It had just blown me over, and David too. And I thought, you know, there's a way to tell this story from all these different voices that would want to be heard. Because by now the research I'd done had told me that we had never found out who set the fire for the ROTC building. The people in town said it was the kids. The kids said it was an outside agitator. And the guard said, we don't know who it was, but it probably was you. So, and then when the order was given to fire, was there an order given to fire? The guard says no. Someone else says there was an agitator with a rifle. Who has the truth here? So I knew that I wanted to tell this story from different angles. So the idea of Lincoln in the Bardo was smart. I mean, it just came to us as these disembodied voices in that particular book might work as a structure for Kent State. So, and I had not read Lincoln in the Bardo in book form. I'd listened to it as an audiobook. So I heard those voices back and forth, like a disagreement, a conversation, something to be learned. And then David came up with the idea of collective memory. He said, what would you think about telling this story from the idea of your memory, your memory, your memory, your memory makes a story? Because every historical event is that. Which I found out when I was writing the 60s trilogy books too, is that I wanted young people to see that lots goes on with history. Lots goes on. It's not just that the Cuban Missile Crisis makes us afraid we won't wake up tomorrow. It's also that other things are going on. In Revolution, for instance, in 1964, we're trying to register Black voters during a presidential election year in Mississippi, the closed society. However, at the same time, the Beatles are coming to America. Willie Mays is having a great year. There's a fair in New York. So the function of the scrapbooks in those particular books helped me to give context to young readers, to older readers, to me, as I began to try and make these stories come to life. So for Kent State, because the subject matter was just so horrific to me, I decided not to use stills, not to use pictures, not to use scrapbooks, to use voices, and to use truth as much as I could find it in these different stories, these different stories that other people had to tell. And in order to do that, I would have to go to Kent State and learn more. So I did. So Jim, my husband Jim, and I went to Kent State and went to the observance every single year for the last 50 years, except this year because we're all at home. And they will do this virtually this year, I'm pretty sure. But they have an observance, the May 4th observance. And they have a visitor center now, the May 4th Visitor Center. And the entire place that surrounds where all this happened is a National Historic Landmark. And you can go to the vigil at night that begins at 11:30 midnight the night before May 4th. You have your candles, you all walk around the university. Anyone can go. We signed up, we didn't even sign up, we just showed up, but they knew we were coming. You walk the university with your candle, you come back to the parking lot where the 4 students were shot and the others, and you put your candle in a peace circle, and then the prayers for the dead are read, and a vigil begins. And someone holds a lantern at each of those 4 places overnight. Every 30 minutes they change. And that vigil goes on all night until noon the next day. And at noon the next day, the observance begins, where the chronology is read of what happened, and then a remembrance from someone who remembers each of the 4 who were killed, Allison, Jeff, Sandy, and Bill. And Kent State has done something remarkable. They have included the Jackson State shootings, the 2 students who were killed there 11 days after Kent State. And just year before last, they began to include the Orangeburg Massacre, as they call it, on University in South Carolina. So this is a remembrance and an observance and a way for us to be able to touch the past, think about it, put it in a place that is useful to us, and use it to make change going forward. It was so moving to be there. I met the people at the May 4th Center. They were just so amazing. They still are. I hope they're here tonight. I've told them we're going to be here. And I came back again to research in the Special Collections Archive. I came by myself, and I researched there and spent some days just going through the massive amount of material. And this is what would have been included in a book, say, like Anthem, Revolution, Countdown, all the primary source documents, letters and newspaper clippings and photographs and student papers, and there's a plethora, you just box upon boxes of research. So I came and I went through this, and I made my notes, and I made my pictures, photographed what I could, and that's when it began to come together. When I held a letter from a townie, that was a letter to the editor of the local paper in Kent that said, "You should have killed more of them." I was speechless. I didn't know even what to say, what to think. There were many of those letters, those townie letters. There were National Guard oral histories, anonymously given. We didn't want to be there. We didn't want to do what we did. We didn't want to, we were just coming from a Teamsters strike. We were tired. We hadn't had any sleep. And there were oral histories from many, many students and kids who lived in town. There were oral histories from faculty members. There were books from faculty members and from the wounded. So these documents and interviews with some wonderful people who allowed me into their lives, including Laura Davis, who was a witness to the shootings and became a professor at Kent State, and who also co-authored the National Historic Landmark nomination for Kent State, allowed me to have the 108-page nomination, which showed me the arc of government overreach in our country that began with the Boston Massacre, that goes on through Wounded Knee, that goes on into Kent State, that goes on into the Dakota Access Pipeline now to separating families from our borders, at our borders, there is a continuum that Kent State takes its place alongside. And when I talked to a wounded student, now a professor in New York, who said to me, I hope you're going to draw that line between what happened at Kent State and what's happening now. That was a challenge. I thought, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. And as I researched and as I asked questions and as people talked to me and as I began to write, these voices, here they came, these voices on, I'll show you some pages, I'll show you here, but I also have this in a slide. These voices came on either side of the page talking to me, from students to faculty, to Black United students, to the National Guard, to townies, all wanting to be heard. And what I realized was that America's First Amendment rights, that's what was violated on that day, on May 4th. The right to petition, the right of the press, the right to protest, the right to have your voice heard in the public marketplace. And that's what we look at today, even in our timeline today, from then to now, of government overreach is one way of just saying it. But in other words, when we quell those First Amendment rights, when we take them away, when we don't allow them, then people begin to get fearful, people begin to get angry, people begin to act out, people begin to take the law into their own hands because they want so much to have it that way. And it's not being heard, it's not being debated, this particular issue, whatever it may be, is not being argued. People aren't being heard. And when people aren't heard, it creates an atmosphere of fear. So that's what allowed me to take that line, that arc that Laura Davis had given me in the National Landmark Historic Application, and also all those voices at Kent State and how they had been speaking to me both through the veil, basically, because you stand there and you feel all those people, you feel them from so long ago coming to you, and all those archive materials and the interviews and the research and David and Scholastic. I mean, everyone who came together to help make this story come together. When I sat down to write it, it came and it came and it came and it came and it came. And it came out in lineated prose. And it's a story about what happened on May 4th. It's a story about First Amendment rights. And it's a call to activism today, to change something, to change many things in our country, so that we have a country where we listen to one another and where we work things out even if we disagree, and we try. So I'm going already onto 7:24. So what I want to do now, I think, is I'd like to show you some slides. Is that okay? Do I hear you? I don't hear you, but I'm going to guess that it's okay for me to stop talking and to show you some pictures. So Leah, if you don't mind helping me do that, I'm going to share the screen and I'm going to go there. So let me take you to Kent State. Here we go. We're doing all right? Tell me if we're not. Okay, so this is the cover. This cover was designed by Elizabeth Parisi. It's Scholastic, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful. She takes my breath away, she's amazing. And as I said, Kent State falls right after Countdown, Revolution, and Anthem, the first three books, or the three books in the 60s trilogy. And when you look at the back and the last scrapbook of Anthem, these are some of the stills that you see. We are stardust, we are golden, and Woodstock, and the moon landing in 1969 when this book takes place, another Woodstock still. And then you see Kent State, because we're going forward out of 1969 in this last scrapbook into 1970. This is what it was like on May 3rd, May 4th, 1970, when the National Guard was tear gassing students. And Kent State comes to you because of that history. On Friday night, students who were still protesting went downtown in Kent to the bars like they always did, created a disturbance down in the town. That's the actual ROTC building. There we go. And again, agitators started it? No, yes, who knows who started it? We were just in the bar drinking our 3-2 beer and living off the weekend, trying to find a game on, trying to find a girl, whatever it might have been, or a guy. And this disturbance on Friday night caused the guard to be called in the next night. And this is the National Guard building burning on Saturday night. And then you have students rallying. You look at those clothes in 1970. I remember them well. Students gathering on the Commons to hear these protest speeches being made. The National Guard trying to get rid of them. That's Taylor Hall in the background where the May 4th Visitor Center is today. And those students running away, and some of them throwing back tear gas canisters at the guard. Guard off campus. They wanted the guard off their campus. They were there illegally, in their opinion. They had not been invited. The governor had sent them. And here they are the next morning, Sunday morning, surrounding the ROTC building, which was basically an old Quonset hut that had been scheduled for demolition, which the townies, of course, said, well, that doesn't mean you could burn it down. You didn't have permission. And look how young they are, some of them. The fourth one over, such a young man, not knowing, you can tell from the expression on his face, he's afraid. And then here they were at the top of Blanket Hill, firing into the parking lot after they had moved students from the Commons over into the parking lot, not allowing their access back. This isn't everyone, but this is part of 2 companies. And students running for cover in the parking lot. Some already are down, as you can see. This is Jeffrey Miller and Marianne Vecchio standing over him. John Filo's picture. Students began to form protective circles around their friends who were down to protect them from whatever might come next. That was a very courageous move. The guard went back up over the hill, regrouped, and was ready to come back when Glenn Frank, the sociology professor, convinced them to disperse, the crowds to disperse, or there would be more slaughter, he said. And they did listen to him. Here are the 4 students killed: Allison Krauss, Bill Schroeder, Jeff Miller, and Sandy Schroyer. 2 of them were teenagers, and 2 of them were walking to class. One had come from a meeting with his ROTC advisor. This is what Kent State looks like. On the right, you can see the townies, the very loud one with her capitalized text, and then the very quiet man next to, well, they're genderless, but in the actual audiobook, they're identified. And you see the students on the left, and you guardsmen, you kept marching, demons in uniform. And then you'll see on the right, the guard saying, we weren't monsters, and another student, you were, you are. And it may look confusing now, but immediately it becomes clear as you begin to read through it. And this is a still from the audio. When the audiobook was performed, Scholastic Audio, Paul Gagney did this particular book, and he's just a genius. And he pulled together this group of actors who performed this book on audio. It's quite amazing. It makes me cry. I recommend this audiobook. Or, you know, if you are a teacher or if you are a parent and you think this is, I think it's great readers' theater. It would be a great play. It has different voices speaking back and forth throughout. 11 days later, the shootings at Jackson State are also included in the book because we also have the Black United Students represented, who basically said, you see a white man in a uniform carrying a rifle and you don't think it has bullets? Because so many students didn't disperse because they didn't believe that the National Guard had bullets in their rifles. And most of those students were white because BUS, the Black United Students, were told to stay away, and most of them did. This is what it looks like on May 4th. when the vigil is being held at Kent State. This is where one fell, another. This is Jeff Miller's spot, actually. This vigil goes on for 12 hours overnight. 3 of the students were Jewish. 1 is Catholic. And this is the full jacket to Kent State. Again, Elizabeth Parisi's genius in wanting to show readers the 67 shots with 4 on the cover to delineate the 4 who had been killed. It's very sober, but it's also very beautiful. And that's it. I'll stop. I know that I'm not leaving a lot of time for questions. Do we want to do that? Let me see if I can get back to you. Ah, there. What do you think, Leah? Questions?
Hi, thank you so much. Sorry, I get a little emotional. So, but yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah,
that was amazing. And I think we're going to move into our question and answer part of our discussion. There's still time, everyone, if you want to add a question in the Ask a Question section on the bottom. And I think we're going to get right to it.
All right, I'm ready.
So our first question is from Kelly. And she says, I'm a graduate of Kent State, class of '89. And what do you think about the similarities in the current events and how young people are protesting Trump? And are they treated by the far right?
Well, there's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of history repeating itself. Without getting too specifically political, what I want to say is political anyway, but because it deals with First Amendment rights. So the idea of the First Amendment rights saying that you do have the right to protest means everyone has the right to protest, but no one has the right to hurt someone else because of that protest. Some of that's open for discussion, some of that's relative, but I do see great parallels there, and I think it would behoove us to listen. That's what I think.
Thank you so much. So well put. So our next one is from Melissa. And she says, hi, my son and I both love the book. We were wondering today about why you chose to leave the voices anonymous and have the reader guess at who is talking. We have some ideas but we wondered what your thoughts were on the process.
My thoughts are that what was giving me so much trouble in the beginning of trying to figure out how to structure this book was I don't know how to tell you. I don't know how to speak from the voice of Allison, Jeff, Sandy, or Bill. I can't do that. I don't know them, and I don't know any of these people. Actually, I don't know the townies. I don't know the guard. I don't really know the faculty, although I interviewed some of them, and I don't know the wounded, although I interviewed some of them. But if I'm not going to write in the voice of or as or tell you a story about a particular student, it makes sense to me that I don't tell you the story of a particular character. So those characters are going to live in the moment because I want you to live in the moment with them. I want you to be right there in that conversation. If you notice, the book starts out to the young reader. It says, hello, young friend. And our young friend here is repeated 2 or 3 times throughout the book, especially beginning and end. And you're asked to join in. You're asked to be part of the activism that should come from reading this book and come from the last question of what do we do about what's going on in the country right now today? Well, you know, if we're going to listen to one another, we need to have avenues to do that. So again, going back to that idea of Lincoln and the Bardo and the disembodied voices, that really is what gave me that idea, is to let them come in and talk to you and let you, the reader, decide who they are. Some people think that they're girls, boys, men, women, whatever it may be. And of course, when you listen to the audio, you see we had to choose a gender. But we didn't choose names. And that lends itself to something like, did you ever see Godspell? If you've seen Godspell, and every cast of Godspell, the characters take on whoever's acting that particular character, it's similar to that. So that when you read this book, if you're doing it, say, in class, or if you're doing it as a play, each of you can have that character's name if you choose to. That's fine. You can choose that I'm Townie number. This is what we did with the audio. This is Townie number 1. This is student number 1. This is National Guard. And so that's how we did it. It just felt to be more powerful to make you pay attention, to be in that conversation. I want you part of it as the young reader. So that was that decision. Make sense?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So we're going to take our next one from Heidi. And she asked, so how does music play a role in your research and storytelling for this book? And there are a couple other questions in this. She also asked, were there any particular artists or songs that really resonated with you most? And what was on your turntable after you heard about these events at Kent State?
Whoa. What was on my turntable in 1970? Oh my goodness. Well, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young were, they had just put out Deja Vu, and that album I wore out on the turntable with Almost Cut My Hair and Teach Your Children in Woodstock. And I wanted to go to Woodstock. I couldn't go to Woodstock. I wasn't allowed to go to Woodstock. So I listened to that over and over. That was one. There were several. And if you read Anthem, you'll see a lot of them, because Anthem has 46 chapters, and each one begins with one of the songs I listened to in 1969 or in the 60s time that relates to that particular chapter, that gives you some info about it. Anything from Inagata Davida to The Association, which was all part of, I loved it all. I loved all those music, all that music. As far as Kent State goes, because I knew I wouldn't have a playlist per se, like I have with the other books, I chose protest songs that would give you a window. I was hoping that when you read this, you would go listen to that song, which I think I mentioned in the author's note. I want you to go and listen to that song and what it has to say. One of my favorites was Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. I just love, love, love that song. And I didn't even realize as a kid that it was a protest song. I didn't get it. And it wasn't until I got older that I started listening again and thought, oh, this is about Vietnam. And so many of them are, like Phil Oakes, all of his catalog is wonderful. There were too many I had to leave out. Country Joe McDonald and his Fish Cry, which was a different cry at Woodstock. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. What are we fighting for? They're powerful. They're stories, and they're part of the story that enriches the story that we're telling, that we're trying to get across to you. So that was the protest songs, especially for Kent State, were very important. They were anchors.
Yeah, I really loved how in between each of your chapters you had those great quotes too, and that you had mentioned. I re-listened to Crosby, Still, Nash and Young, Ohio, that I never really connected what the historical connection was. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I listened to that over and over as well. Of course, that was the Ohio song was written and recorded and published within months of Kent State. And I know that David Crosby still goes back to Kent State often, I'm told. And they were scheduled to be there. He was scheduled to be there on this May 4th. I think they're doing something virtually. But yeah, it was all of us were stunned. It was just so stunning and music is one of the ways that we can tell stories and we can deal with our feelings. And so to me, it would have been remiss not to include them.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So we're going to take another one. Our next one is also from Melissa. She had one more question. She said, we wondered, when you researched the book, what was the most surprising thing that you discovered?
There were many surprising things. The involvement of us, Black United Students, that was huge. And how they already knew what was going on before white kids knew. Also, I didn't realize as a kid that there were 4 days involved with this, starting from that April 30th television conference that Nixon gave to the country to May 4th. And I didn't know that. And also, I was so stunned. And in a way, I guess my younger self wouldn't have been stunned at this because I lived this, but I guess you get older and you don't remember it as well until it faces you again. That the vitriol from the townspeople, just, there's a lot of that still today. There's a lot of that, they call it the town and gown grit in any college town, but a lot of people wrote in that this destroyed Kent. It just destroyed Kent as a town. Beautiful little Kent with its rivers and its black squirrels and its lilacs, and you've just destroyed our town. And also the guardsmen's oral histories. There was one in particular, it's anonymous, but it just broke my heart. It broke my heart. And it helped me to understand that no one is all good and all bad, or all bad. There was more to the story that I didn't know. As a kid, it was like National Guard came in and killed people and they're terrible. But then to know the rest of their story, this is back to the very first question that we had. This is kind of what I want to get at. People who have a totally different framework and a totally different idea of politics, history, what's right and wrong, they also need to be listened to. We all need to be listened to because our viewpoint, mine, might be totally different from yours. But to find ways to communicate, that's just so important. It's just so important. So
it's so true. Thank you.
Yeah.
So our next one is from Heidi again, and this one's for this one. She asks, which perspective in the book was the most challenging to write? That's a good segue from what you just said about the guardsmen.
Oh boy. Well, I had a lot of material for all of them. I had a lot of material for every single character that I created. And there were 6 of them altogether, 2 townies, 2 students, and a Black United student and the National Guard. And they all represented a different viewpoint. I don't know necessarily which one was harder in that. Like I said earlier, when I began to write it, bam, 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 bam. It was just like I'd been working on it for so long up here and so long in here and so long down here that it just began coming and coming and coming. I can't really say that one was particularly harder than the other. They were all hard. I can't, but they were all there. They were all there, almost fully formed, asking for expression. So.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to take a few more. So from next one.
I'm glad. I'm happy to.
Our next one's also from Heidi. So we kind of talked about before when you said about mention the audiobook, but she asked, do you think your book is better read alone or read aloud?
When we first started presenting this book, Scholastic and I, we played pieces of the audio instead of me reading it from a podium at conferences, because I think it would be confusing to read back and forth without attributions. He said, she said, or naming those characters. So to me, as a personal, private read, I think it's fabulous. I also think that it's a great read to do with 6 people or 7 people or 8 people, or change them out for every day and have a different cast for every day that you read the book, or for every day that exists in the story, or have somebody different who's your narrator, or somebody in the beginning with the prelude, or somebody different who does the very last piece of it, the elegy. So there are ways to read this, many different ways, but I kind of feel like one person reading it out loud, maybe you would have to come up with some ways to tell us who's speaking. So that's just the art of it. That's just the way that it's been done artfully. That was a writing decision, a creating decision. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm still there. Thank you so much. I'm going to add a few other questions that I have as well. So I was going to ask, I mean, this book is so amazing and really just broke me every time I read it. I was wondering, what do you, are you working on anything particular next?
Contracted the next book, and again, this goes back to our very first question. I've sold a book that I was calling for the longest time, and this came out of Kent State in its way. And some of my work seems to one thing grows another thing, grows another thing, because I'm curious and because I want to know and I ask questions and something comes up and then something else comes up. So this particular book, I was calling it for a long time, the Lost Cause of the Confederacy and the Rise of White Supremacy. I grew up in the South. I love the South. I love Mississippi, where my grandparents were. I love my family's still there. I was born in Mobile, Alabama. And yet I understand the realities of a lot of the South. And I also grew up with the myth of the lost cause, that the South's cause was just, and it wasn't about slavery, and that the Northern aggressors ruined everything, basically. Not to get too far into it, but I'm interested in it, in how this twist of the lost cause from very deep grief, very, very deep grief. There was no one not touched by death in the Civil War, and it was horrible. And to turn that wanting to honor those dead, those Confederate dead, into this lost cause mythology that leads to the white supremacy. I'm studying that now. I'm practicing with that. I'm trying to be concentrating on that during this Corona time, which is hard, but I will. And the working title is Charlottesville.
Thank you.
So
I'm
that's
so
what
excited to see it.
I'm excited to see it. I want to see it because I want to understand it. I write to understand. So
you mentioned during this time of Corona, I was also going to ask, what have you been doing to fill your time? And are you reading anything in particular?
I'm rereading comfort reads. There are some favorite books that I absolutely love. Deliverance by James Dickey, and Eudora Welty's Delta Wedding, and I've got the new Hilary Mantel to begin. And a friend gave it to me as an audiobook, and I can't wait because that's how I listen to the other two. And what I've been doing is basically what I think maybe everybody else has been doing, which is figuring this out day by day, week by week, month by month, and taking really good care of ourselves and one another, and staying in touch, and hoping to get back to work, and also promoting this book, because I feel like its time is now. Its time is now. What's going on now is a reflection of 50 years ago, is a reflection of the years before that and before that. When do we change things, and how do we change things? Which leads me to the last part of this. Do you want me to read the very last bit?
Yeah, I was going to invite you, if you can read the end, because I feel like it's so impactful of asking everybody what they can do after having experienced this book. I feel like it's a great call to arms. So if you can share that with us, that would be great.
I'm going to read the last bit of Kent State to end. First of all, thank you again. Thank you to everybody who came. It means a lot that you would come and that you would think about a book this heavy at a time this heavy. But in a way, the book is full of hope. The book is full of, like Uncle Edisto says in Each Little Bird That Sings, he says, open your arms to life, let it strut into your heart with all its messy glory, because we live with both sides of the stick. You can't have good without bad, up without down, yes without no, and you don't have grief without some sort of hope. So this is at the very, very end in the elegy of Kent State. This is the call to action for young people, for older people, for all people. Are you ready? Okay. So what do you intend to do? Says the townie. And the students reply, we intend to follow their lead, Allison, Jeff, Sandy, and Bill. We intend to live good lives. We intend to become informed citizens. We intend to be good friends. We intend to stand up for what's right. We intend to call out what's wrong. We intend to use our privilege and our talents and our energy to make this democracy work, to change this country. We intend to be the conscience of America. It has always been the young who are our champions of justice, who stand at the vanguard of change. And that's what we invite you to do, our new friend. You have come all this way with us, and you are still here. Good. We hope you're on fire for change, for hope, for love. Souls on fire. Here is all you have to do. Insert your name here. The end.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. This has been my pleasure and my delight and my opportunity. And thank all of you for coming to be with us too. It means a lot. Be safe, be well, take care of one another. We will meet again.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Deborah, for joining us this evening and briefing this new platform with us and sharing your moving and informative new book. I hope readers will read this and insert their name there. So don't forget to click that shining green button on the bottom that says purchase this book below so you can get your copy of Kent State by Deborah Wiles and her other amazing novels. Also, thank you, viewers, for joining us. It's your support that keeps us going in a time like this. And so we'll hope you continue to shop online and attend these amazing digital events like this one. You can click the follow button at the top of your screen to get notifications about other Politics and Prose Crowdcast events, and check our website for updated event listings. You can also follow us on social media platforms at Kids and Prose for updates and on kids and teen events, as well as continue the conversation of what you're reading, and tell us what you think. And as Deborah says in her book, she quotes, "We said in the 60s, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Enough, let's get to work." Yeah. So with that, I hope to see you all again and keep reading widely. Stay safe and stay well.
Yes, and support your indie bookstore. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.